Hello, and welcome to this IWF Policy Chat, hosted by our Center for Economic Opportunity. I'm Patrice Onwuka, the director of the Center for Economic Opportunity, and we're here to talk to you today about an interesting topic related to graduation season. As you know, June caps off the end of celebrations for many students from high school to college. Somewhere upwards of 8 million students will don a cap and gown this season and receive their degree, whether from high school or college or higher education. Now, for decades, the four-year degree was considered the best pathway to the middle class. Now, despite these high numbers of college enrollment, younger generations are questioning the value of the degree, especially in light of the nearly $2 trillion of student loan debt that borrowers have accumulated, much of it from advanced degrees. Perhaps the better question is, what is the necessity of a four-year degree? And I bet those who do not have a four-year degree might have an interesting answer. Currently, 70 million workers do not possess that college diploma. Over the past 3 decades, non-grads have actually lost ground in the labor market. They have higher unemployment rates and lower labor force participation. Millions of non-college educated people, though, could be gainfully employed in upwardly mobile positions. Unfortunately, degree requirements stand in their way. Others could be trained to obtain desired skills without ever having to step onto a college campus. At the same time, you've got employers who are beginning to perceive that a college diploma does not guarantee higher productivity for the workers that they've employed. Relevant experience may be just as valuable or more valuable, especially in those hard to fill roles. So, today we're going to talk about this. We're going to examine this idea of degree inflation. And I've got several experts here who are going to speak from different perspectives. I've got to say, though, our timing cannot be better because tomorrow in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Education and Workforce Committee will actually be holding a hearing entitled Competencies Over Degrees, transitioning to a skill-based economy. So this is the perfect timing to kick off, I think, a larger national conversation. Let's get into it. I've got a couple of brief bios. Let me introduce, first off, Inez Stetman. She is my colleague, a senior policy analyst here at Independent Women's Forum. And she's the host of High Noon with Inez Stetman, a podcast that hosts conversations with heterodox thinkers on a variety of important cultural and political subjects. She's got decades of experience in ed policy, so we can't wait to get into this with her. Lorena Riley is a senior administrative officer at IWF, concentrating on internal human resource and accounting activities. And Stacy Goober is a visiting fellow at the Cicero Institute. Prior to joining Cicero, she spent 10 years working in the private sector at Slolam Consulting, Alliance Bernstein, and Morgan Stanley. And by the way, she has a Wall Street Journal op-ed, I believe it is today, Stacy, talking about this topic. So let's just dive right in. And Stacy, I ended with your bios. I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about this idea of degree inflation, which is simply that many more jobs today require a four-year diploma than they did in the past. And to me, it seems like the actual functions of the job have not changed, but the requirements have. So can you talk to us about what we're seeing this phenomenon?
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. So as you mentioned, degree inflation is just essentially the increasing requirement of college degrees for jobs that didn't require them in the past, right? We've got all these boomers who are exiting these roles. And now the people that are coming in to fill them, they're required to have degrees that the people who are exiting didn't have to have. In terms of the types of roles that we're talking about, we're essentially talking about middle skilled roles, which require more than a high school degree, but less than a college degree. So some examples, to kind of think about, we're talking about supervisors, administrative assistants, managers, childcare workers, IT roles. These are all roles that are kind of falling into this degree inflation category. Something that synonymously goes alongside with degree inflation is the term paper ceiling, right? So we're finding that a lot of these people are hitting into this invisible barrier whereby they cannot get to the next level because they do not have that paper degree. So an example would be someone who has worked at a store for the last 5 years, for example, right? They're the most qualified individual for the next level for the role of becoming a store manager. But with this degree inflation, now the store managers are required to have college degrees. And even though this person is the most qualified person for the role, because we're in this degree inflation environment and not in skills-based hiring, this person's unable to get that role, right? So he's hitting into that paper ceiling. As you mentioned, this is a very common trend right now. At least 53% of the US workforce falls into this category, right? And as you mentioned, that's over 70 million workers who are skilled through alternative routes, meaning that they are skilled for a lot of these positions, but they just do not possess this degree. So, something has to change.
Well, Lorena, picking up a little bit on that, have you seen some jobs, that have been advertised for? Maybe you've even had to fill roles that require degrees, but maybe now, but it doesn't seem like they should require degrees.
I have. I mean, there are a lot of, I would say, accounting jobs. I have a friend who works in healthcare administration, and she said they often advertise jobs using the term bachelor degree preferred. And she said that there are roles such as healthcare management administration or healthcare IT management roles, where she said that really if they had candidates with experience, and maybe a little more proper on the job mentoring, they could do really well in the jobs. And she said it actually makes her cringe a little because she said sometimes, they have excellent candidates, but because they're saying bachelor degree preferred, they're kind of like, eh. But even there are a lot of accounting jobs. I mean, I'm going to use myself as an example, but a really long time ago, I had a history degree. I had trouble finding a job. A law firm offered me an account, like a very low level accounting job, even though I had no experience or education. But they gave me a lot of good on the job training. And eventually they said, if you go back and get an accounting degree, we'll pay for half. And they ended up, eventually I was the assistant controller. And you do need an accounting degree for that. But if they hadn't given me a chance, I never would have gotten there, if that makes sense. And there are other accounting jobs like accounts receivable, accounts payable, payroll assistants, where you could do very well with a 2-year degree or maybe just experience. And again, someone training you and giving you a chance, but you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree to do those jobs.
Well, from what I'm picking up so far from what you both have mentioned is that number one, degree requirements, 4-year degree requirements can be a huge hurdle and obstacle for gaining employment as well as rising up and gaining, higher level opportunities. But also that there are other ways to determine competency, for employers to do that. And Inez, I think this is a great time for you to talk about how did we get here? I think we joked during, well, I shouldn't say we joke, but, there were plenty of advertisements during the Great Recession for, baristas with a 4-year degree. And this idea that during that time, lots of employers were able to, because of there were so few jobs and so many people, they could increase the number of requirements and add on that degree requirement and get higher educated workers. But did degree inflation really start there, or did it start previously?
Well, I think the first thing to understand about this is that it's the product of a series of policy choices, right? I think we talk about this as though it were coming out of the ether, that like this degree inflation, the phrase I like to use is credentialing treadmill, but that this just came out of the air or out of the natural market, and I think that that's very much not the case. I think it's a series of conscious policy choices, many of which I would argue have been shown to be big mistakes. One of the most important of those policy choices is just heavily subsidizing the 4-year university track at the expense of every other route to the middle class or to the American dream and the success that we hope that anyone who's hardworking and diligent and bright would be able to achieve in the United States, right? And that started all the way back in the Great Society. when we first started subsidizing student loans, but it's really ramped up in the last few decades. And really what you see is the problem is not just with credentialing, it's how much the credentialing now costs. Because we've so heavily subsidized these degrees, what's happened is it's pushed the tuition cost of university way, way above inflation. So we complain a lot about, inflationary healthcare costs, for example, and now we have to talk about inflationary costs for eggs and at the grocery store. University tuition is at the top of that chart, right? It is more inflationary than virtually any other commodity, certainly any commodity that's as sort of important to the middle class American lifestyle. It really is putting an enormous amount of financial stress on middle class families. And we see that with the push for student loan forgiveness, right? Because there simply is so much of this outstanding student loan debt that isn't justified by the jobs that, as Stacey was saying, now say bachelor's preferred or at the bottom, right? And those jobs aren't necessarily different. They don't pay very much more than they used to, and they really won't support the kind of debt that is now necessary to take on in order to get a degree, unless, like Lorena said, right, you get a deal with your employer and they help you out and they give you those kinds of opportunities. And while that's great, right, that's not, you can't build a system in which you're counting on sort of the employer to subsidize the education for their employees. So there's just been a lot of these policy choices, and we can get more into them. But one more I just want to briefly touch on is the banning of any kind of most kind of employment tests. Right. So it started with IQ tests, but it could be any test that produces a quote unquote disparate impact among racial groups is presumptively suspect under Title VII of the CRA, and then also under a Supreme Court case called Griggs. But in the 90s, the Congress basically updated the Civil Rights Act to reflect the understanding of Griggs. So even if the Supreme Court overturns that case, we still have sort of this legislative piece to deal with. That has been enormously damaging, right? We're not talking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We're talking about what happened in the 90s, and it created all kinds of malincentives. And one of them was, well, if we can't test for the skills that we want because that produces a disparate impact, what we'll do is we'll require a degree almost as a credential to just show up, like to prove that somebody is minimally competent, will show up every day, right? And what we've done is, instead of having people take a test, which actually allows people who come from lower income backgrounds to potentially do well on this test and sort of advance themselves, what we've done is instead we've required them to get $100,000 degree. And of course that has a disparate impact of its own, a massive one. But somehow we don't consider that to be right in violation of these 90s revisions of the Civil Rights Act, whereas any kind of test that might circumvent that enormous credentialing expense to prove something quite basic about a potential employee, we've displaced what I would regard as a much fairer way to distinguish between applicants than requiring them to go into debt, as sometimes six-figure debt, to prove something that could be proved with a basic test.
Well, Lorena, I mean, what is the degree supposed to signal, and does it signal that to employers today?
I think it depends upon the degree. I mean, there are certain degrees, like STEM degrees, that really do convey that you probably have some specialized knowledge and expertise in a certain subject area. But then I think there are a lot of broader degrees, like general business or history or English or something. I mean, they don't really tell me what you know or what you can do. I think they're probably applicable to a wide range of things. But I also think when you're looking at someone's resume, and yes, they earned a degree, it's worth looking at what else did they do? Did they work while they were going to school? Did they volunteer? Did they start a club? Did they do any sort of activity? I think earning a degree shows that you can finish a program, but I think when you add other things to that, like working or volunteering or whatever, you're showing that, you're able to achieve something, and you're expanding upon soft skills like hard work and discipline and time management and critical thinking. You're doing more than, I don't know. I think a lot of people can get through school, if that makes sense. Like,
they can earn the degree and show up to class.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean they'll be the kind of worker that you want hired.
Yes. So I don't know that the degree itself as an HR person really tells me everything I want to know about can you do this job and do we want to hire you? I think there needs to be more added to that.
Well, and Stacy, I mean, I think that we've seen some reports coming out. I think Harvard Business had done some research not too long ago, organizations like Opportunity at Work, but they've looked at that and they've found that, yeah, employers are questioning whether the degree is that good signal and a good replacement to the competency testing that Inez laid out so well is really not illegal or probably wouldn't pass constitutional muster. But when we think about the people who are impacted, Inez started to hit on it. Who are really people being held back by these degree requirements?
Right. So just to put into perspective, let's look at the math of this, right? If 70% of all new jobs require a bachelor's degree, that only leaves 30% of the roughly 30% of jobs for the roughly 66% of Americans that do not hold a college degree, right? And so the majority of people who are impacted, it comes down to when employers screen for bachelor's degree, it tends to exclude Black, Hispanic, rural, and veteran workers. And just as everyone's kind of alluded to, this does not only hurt the candidates that are applying, but it also impacts the employers. The employers are not able to hire the most qualified candidates, right? They're just kind of picking the people that they're able to check the box for whether or not they are the most qualified. During my research over the last year and a half, I segmented the different groups, the different types of people in the population for this type of initiative into 3 different buckets: the skilled employed, the skilled unemployed, and veterans. The skilled employed, we're looking at people who are like the person who's working at a store that's trying to get to the store manager role, someone who's hitting into the paper ceiling. The skilled unemployed, take, for example, I'll use an example of myself, right? I was employed. I took time off when I had children and then going back into work. If I'm applying for a similar job that maybe didn't need a bachelor's degree in the past, but is requiring one now in the future. And then a large category, which is veterans. I have a striking example of a military IT veteran, right? Who's been in service for X number of years. And is leaving service, coming and looking to apply for a similar type of role in the public sector, but is considered unqualified, despite the fact that that person has been protecting the most secure national military secrets, right, for the last how many number of years. And it's simply because that individual does not have the college degree. And just as everyone mentioned, individuals across all these buckets, they feel unnecessarily forced to either get the easiest college degree, right? As you touched upon, potentially something that doesn't even match up to whatever job that this person is going to try and go into, but just to check that box. And then also misses out on 4 years of meaningful employment when they could be furthering their skill set while also taking on a ton of student debt. I think what's sad about this whole situation is that this paper ceiling idea and degree inflation is really just perpetuating inequality in America.
I gotta agree there. And when we've been talking, all I remember is I regularly see an ad for an older Black woman, middle age, talking about, she needed to go to a college. And this was an advertisement for a private institution. But it appealed obviously to middle-aged workers who have decades of experience. She talked about having experience, but talked about that she wanted to prove to her daughter how important it is for her to get the degree so that she can rise in her occupation. And maybe for that occupation, she needed it. I think we can distinguish between highly technical occupations that do require 4-year or advanced degrees versus those middle skill and even lower skill, but middle skill jobs that don't necessarily require that extra degree. But still, there's that paper ceiling that you mentioned, Stacy. So I'm torn between going in 2 directions: a cultural direction or a policy kind of solutions direction. But let's go with the cultural one. Inez, I think we're going to just let's attack this every kid to college model. Can you talk about how that has been, maybe it helps some, sure it does, but how detrimental it is? Because I think that's kind of the very root of a lot of this.
Right. We had back under the Obama administration, President Obama coming out and saying he wanted to send every American to college by 2020. Obviously, that hasn't happened, but the question is whether that's even valuable. And to speak about who's actually very much not benefiting from this overwhelming subsidy for one track. Um, I'm gonna throw up this graph onto the screen. You can see that. So these are basically the quartiles, income quartiles, and what we're seeing is that this enormous subsidy, supposedly on the benefit of people who can't afford to go to college, right? What we're seeing is that the people who are really benefiting from that, who are really getting a lot more of those degrees, are the people in the top half of the income spectrum, whereas people whose families come from the lowest or second lowest quartile, so the bottom half of the income spectrum, they're not ending up on campus at all, right? So there are fewer people from the lower half of the income spectrum who are actually ending up at university than before we ostensibly put in all these programs to help on their behalf. What's actually happening is we're further subsidizing the degree track of the top half of the income spectrum. This is one of the most incredibly regressive policies you can think of, right? As is student loan forgiveness, which will then go disproportionately to the upper half of the income spectrum as well. Essentially, what we're talking about is subsidizing and now bailing out the professional managerial class in this country at the expense of workers without a degree. Because really what we've given those workers is a kind of a Hobson's choice, right? To get that same foot on the ladder, that same position that now says degree preferred at the bottom, right? But their fathers probably would have gotten without the college degree. They have a choice. Either they can go into debt, and usually a disproportionate amount of debt comparatively to the salary of that position, right?
Yeah.
So either they can find themselves in the large number of Americans who are sort of have this disproportionately heavy student loan debt burden, and finding that the jobs that they're getting are not really covering those bills in a comfortable way. So that's choice one. Choice two is they can decide they want to credential themselves some other way. They can try to get one of those positions that is not degree preferred, which Stacy pointed out is a third and probably shrinking of a position. So they're putting themselves into an incredible sort of competition for a smaller and smaller number of jobs. Right. And that's just very tough to get your foot in the job market that way. So that I think is the choice that a lot of young Americans are facing now is, do I, grind out under debt burden, or do I conduct a potentially fruitless search for a job that's going to get me that first rung on the ladder that has been the case for their fathers and their grandfathers. Right. And so these are all things that are policy choices. I think it's really important to talk about who's benefiting from these policy choices. When we decided that a 4-year degree was the route to success in this country, and that we were going to spend trillions of dollars subsidizing student loans, giving direct grants to universities, right? And to arrange our law so that alternate paths to success, whether that's taking a test or getting some kind of technical training, or any other number of routes to success. What happens when we downgrade those kinds of routes? Who benefits? Well, largely it's been the children of the upper middle class. It's been those who are taking sort of professional managerial white collar route. And overwhelmingly, it's been universities, right? Who get to continue charging escalating amounts of money for a product that is declining in terms of what they're actually offering. There's been about a third of a drop in literacy among college grads in the last 20 years. So they're not providing a kind of real training or product that's correlating. And I think that's what you're hearing from Lorena and Stacy is oftentimes those degrees are not correlating super well with the skills that employers actually want or any real kind of competency. What we're doing is credentialing people at ever escalating amounts of money, which hire lots of university administrators and give lots of people in universities a sort of power and
don't make our
platform
workforce better off, and don't make exactly. Well, Inez, thank you, because I think you led us very naturally into solutions. And I think and this is great for Lorena and for Stacy to talk about, there's private and public solutions here. Lorena, I'll start with you on the private sector. What can private employers be doing?
I think for one, it depends. I mean, like Inez said, and maybe Stacy, there are jobs where you probably really do need a degree or a higher level degree. But I think that when you automatically use a degree as a benchmark for every position, you automatically eliminate the pool of talent. You filter out people who maybe didn't have the opportunity or the resources to earn a 4-year degree. You filter out real world experience, life experience, certificates. And to jump on Stacy's comment about veterans, according to Military One Source, less than 20% of enlisted military have a 4-year or higher degree. But they have experience. I mean, every day they learn effective communication, teamwork, leadership, and they learn hard skills. The military is doing jobs in finance, HR, information technology. So they're acquiring all sorts of things. But if you require a degree, so that's from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it gives details about different military jobs and how they translate, like what would the civilian equivalent be? What are those skills? But if you automatically require a degree, then these military men and women who are doing this work, sometimes for years before they retire, get out and they automatically are eliminated from jobs that require degrees. And I think that private companies lose out on a really valuable resource when that happens. But there are companies like Delta, Apple, Hilton, IBM who have eliminated a degree as a requirement for an interview. So that at least gives you a chance to get your foot in the door. Google launched its Google Certificates program a few years ago. It's about $250 for a 6-month online course, but they offer, I don't know how many, well over 100 courses, but each course is aimed towards teaching a specific skill set. And then they'll help you, look for a job. And I had read, I think in 2022, as of 2022, they had over 300,000 graduates from these programs. And when they were surveyed, 75% of those 300,000 said that once they completed the Google course, they either found a new job, got a promotion, earned a raise. So these are big private companies, that are potentially leading the way in making it easier or eliminating that requirement. And one thing I just wanted to say is I think a lot of times companies use the degree requirement because it's an easy filter. It just makes it easy to say, this eliminates 80,000 people from applying for this job. And I think it can be hard to assess skills, but in the long run, I think it would benefit, potential employees, but also companies if you thought about what does someone really need to be successful at this job and to help my company be successful. And if you put thought into that beforehand, then I think on the back end, it benefits everybody.
Well, interestingly, there have been surveys of employers who found that, degreed candidates can sometimes, as workers, not just from a productivity level, but engagement, turnover, on different facets of, work employee satisfaction. Some of their degreed candidates or workers, don't score as highly as their non-degreed workforce. And so it's those workers who don't have a degree, but have the experience and the skills and are probably better fits for the positions. They find that their turnover rates are lower, that they're more productive, more engaged in the labor force and in their jobs. So I thought that's really interesting and underscores what you were talking about, Lorena. All right. So public sector, what's going on, Stacy, and what are you guys doing?
Absolutely. So here at Cicero, we are working across the country with our partners to try and further this initiative. Each state has been handling their approach differently. Some governors are instituting executive orders, like we saw with Governor Hogan in Maryland last year in March, while others are codifying it with legislation. What's important is that the momentum is there, right? Since Governor Hogan instituted his executive order last year, his peers have really been following suit. People are realizing that this policy is a winner for really everyone involved, both sides of the aisle. And we are confident that this idea and this initiative is going to continue to expand. So far, at least 12 states have passed either some sort of executive order or some type of legislation. Here at CISO, we're also working with at least another 5 states. So we're in the process of moving things forward there. We've had different levels of engagement with each state. Sometimes we're just introducing the idea. Other times we've been helping to craft executive orders. We're starting to help with implementation, right? Because it's one thing to just announce this fantastic move to skills-based hiring, but to actually implement it is really hard, just as you've said. Valuing people or looking at candidates based on skills is a lot harder than just checking the degree box. Additionally, we're looking to measure success going forward, and then also just help to codify legislation. There is one thing that I just wanted to mention, though, as a follow-up to your comments just now. What's important to remember about this initiative, and it's the one piece of feedback that we have heard, one piece of pushback, is that this initiative isn't an attack on the value of a college degree. And it's important for everyone to remember that as we talk about this, right? For some, that is the best path. But this is really focused on that group of people that are skilled and that just have so much latent potential and are ready to be employed in meaningful roles. So it's just important to point that out because when people realize, make sure that we're talking about the right group of people and realize where this initiative can go, then they realize, the importance of it and how it can just impact so many people and better people's lives.
Well, and that's understandable, Stacey. I mean, I think it's fair to say, and hopefully we've made that distinction. There are lots of positions that probably do require an advanced degree or require a 4-year degree. And if you already have secured a 4-year degree, that's a great and important accomplishment. The 4-year degrees exist for a reason, and I think I have one, and there's nothing wrong in pursuing that. But the bigger point is that for too long as a society, and whether driven by policy decisions, which I think, Inez, you would absolutely say, but culture has just pushed everyone on one track to the neglect of so many others. And it's unfortunately, from a big picture economic standpoint, where we are now is that we have over 10 million open positions right now. And many industries will tell you they can't find workers, not just workers who are skilled, sure, but bodies, people willing to work. Yet we have over 5-6 million people who are unemployed. There's obviously a mismatch there, but I think there's a lot of opportunity if we can figure out how we can show younger people that there are lots of different pathways to the kind of life that they want. As we start to kind of round out the conversation, Inez, are there other policies that you would like to see implemented? And I know I'll just let you throw out what you would love to see to address both degree inflation, but also getting at this cultural and social idea of the every kid to college model.
I mean, we have to stop disproportionately shoveling incentives and money towards universities. In doing so, we have given them enormous cultural power they never should have had, right? Universities, just to broaden out the political conversation, universities have pretty much always leaned left, or at least for the last 100 years. Right? William F. Buckley wrote God and Man at Yale 70 years ago. The right has been complaining about the leftward bent of universities for a long time. That one of the biggest changes in the last 30 years has been the stranglehold that universities have over this success route, right? So, and it's given them basically cultural control over the pipelines to the elite in a very fundamental way. I think that's been very culturally bad for the United States. And just to think about how strongly our policy choices, all of which can be undone, subsidize this route. I mean, imagine, let's say, a study abroad program. Okay, like maybe there's some enrichment there, but fundamentally it's just kind of a good time. You learn some things, but it's not necessarily directly applicable unless you happen to be, for example, looking for a job in that country afterwards or something like that, right? So for some small percentage of people, it's something that's required, but generally it's pretty fun. If we had every financial institution in this country, let's say if Wells Fargo advertised $100,000 loans for this program to every 17-year-old with some baseline competency of grades and said, hey, like we'll loan you this money, just sign here on the dotted line, and you too could be climbing mountains in Peru. Here's this lovely picture of people having a great time doing just that, right? We would call that actually predatory. We'd call those predatory loans. Democrats would be up in arms about them in Congress. They would be saying that it's, totally inappropriate to weasel 18-year-olds into signing on this dotted line, on the promises of climbing these mountains, when in reality, this didn't give them that much of a leg up after. That's essentially what we've done with universities, right? There's a lot of talk around these loans as sort of a matter of personal responsibility, and in some cases that's true. In some sense, that's true, but that really ignores that choice that I laid out before, where the job market really is forcing people into making this choice because we've spent these trillions of dollars, because we have special loans backed by the government, and because we put those in front of every graduating 17-year-old in the country. Those loans would not exist in the private market. There's no way that in 1990, any competent financial institution would write $100,000 check to study, some kind of I used to use underwater basket weaving, but frankly, I think there's plenty of examples, right? But there's no way that a competent financial institution would underwrite that loan, because they know that the chance of it being paid off is quite low. Well, the federal government will underwrite that loan, and then it'll charge you 8% interest on it, which is really what's burying a lot of people. So yeah, there's lots of policy choices we could make. We could open alternative routes. We could by allowing certain kinds of testing, employers to exactly. That's the problem that I think Lorena was pointing to. It is really hard when it's all about quote unquote soft skills, but some things aren't soft skills, right? Some things are just, I need to know that you're, sort of basically competent and smart enough to handle this one thing. And what better way to do that than by, sort of administering a test version of the job. But that's largely illegal in a lot of fields in this country. That's a problem. But fundamentally, we just need to pull back. We need to pull back these loans. I think there's the possibility, and I've been advocating for a kind of grand bargain on the student loans, where in exchange for dealing with the short-term financial problem on the back of a taxpayer, we get some promises about drawing down this entire system. And finally, I think one of the most important solutions would be to make universities responsible for the success of their graduates. Make sure that they have some kind of skin in the game going forward, because what we're seeing right now is there are no consequences because of all these massive student loans. There are no consequences for universities. They can continue taking, 17-year-olds' money till the cows come home. They can continue dropping academic standards, because why not? There's more 17-year-olds that can come and pay you an ever increasing tuition check. So all the incentives for universities are bad, and we need to make sure that they're once again actually invested in the success of their graduates.
Wow. Well, I've gotten 3 sets of solutions here, and I think they go to 3 different types of audiences, but all really important, both short-term and long-term. In the short term, from a private sector side, it is important for employers to look at all of the jobs and maybe conduct audits and figure out how they can switch to competency-based assessments, to your point, Lorena. From the public sector side, Stacey, you talked about states that are removing the degree requirements for, large majorities of their open positions. And that's something that every state can do right away. And then longer term, Inez, you're talking about the cost of college, what's driving college. And part of it is just the subsidization of higher education, and this idea that so many people need to get that degree as a credential to get into the jobs that are available. And there are ways that public policy officials can be thinking in the immediate term as well as in the longer term, how they can untangle the web that we've woven And really, at the end of the day, this is about ensuring everyone has equal access to opportunity and to be able to create kind of the future that suits them best. Whether that's going to a four-year college or that's going to getting training through trade or working for a number of years in the private sector and building out that kind of career. So this was fantastic. I appreciate everything you guys shared today. We'll make sure that we share this link and a lot of the links that you guys shared as resources on this topic. Again, Inez, thank you. Stacy, thank you. Lorena, thank you for your time today. And thank you to our IWF audience for listening to this policy chat. We host these on a regular basis on specific topics with women and men who are experts in these different issues, because we really want to bring those different perspectives to the table. I love this topic of degree inflation, and there's efforts to unwind it and to combat it. And by the way, as Stacy said, these are bipartisan efforts. So tune in again to our next policy chat in the month of July. And until then, be well, thrive, and we hope that you'll succeed. Thank you so much.